Sorry I missed you on Monday. I was hard at work carving a Susan Wojcicki-shaped notch in my bedpost, which is the second such notch for me, if you're keeping score at home. So, episode number 199 got pulled down the other day for election misinformation. A 3-week-old video with 114 views, but election misinformation is such an insipid, many-tentacled beast, one has to stamp it out wherever one finds it, even if it means banning a 3-week-old video with 114 views on a channel with 68 subscribers. But that is just how damn important this is. If we let our guard down even momentarily, then the misinformationists might win. And honestly, I'm of two minds whether to even talk about this, since I'm generally not a great fan of videos where it's just YouTubers bitching about YouTube. But as coincidence would have it, today of all days, Susan Wojcicki is actually in the news with her demand that world governments should start banning more speech so that she doesn't have to. So I will take that as the universe's way of saying, okay, maybe I should talk about it. And speaking of things that seem like weird coincidences, I can't decide whether I should read anything into the fact that the two videos I've had banned were episode 99 and episode 199. But they were nice enough this time to actually quote the specific bylaw under which I've been summarily declared guilty, which I don't remember them doing that the first time, 8 or 9 months ago, or however long 100 episodes is. So here is the letter of the law against which I have supposedly transgressed. Quote, advancing false claims that widespread voter fraud changed the result of the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Unquote. First, I never did any such thing, either in that video or in any other video. In point of fact, the title of the offending episode is Industrialized Vote Fraud is Not Social Justice. And that statement has nothing whatever to do with any past election. The point I was making, which was perfectly obvious to any sane person who actually watched the damn video, was that congressional Democrats are attempting to enshrine their favorite vote fraud schemes into the United States Code, effectively rigging all future elections so that their side can never lose. And they were doing it under the guise of social justice and contrived racial grievance, which is the same guise under which they do nearly everything else. I didn't even mention anything about the 2020 election, much less make any claim about vote fraud changing the result. If I had wanted to say that, I would damn well have said it. Mincing words is not something we do on this program. But you have to love the wording of that policy I just quoted, don't you? There are 6 words that it instantly brings to mind. Methinks thou dost protest too much. First, you've got the bit about advancing false claims. Does the word false really need to be in there? Because when you phrase it like that, you sound like a person who knows they're wrong and they're trying to convince themselves otherwise. But the best part, my absolute favorite part, the part that self-obliterates any claim that these people are just trying to safeguard the truth, is the fact that Joe Biden's 2020 election victory, allegedly, is the only election in the history of world democracy that you are not allowed to question on YouTube. But you can see why they have to do it that way. Can you imagine all the videos they would have to pull down if they applied that same standard to every election? For starters, they would have to pull down every video wherein somebody alleged that Trump was not the real winner in 2016. And just imagine what a bloodbath that would be for the mainstream fake news media. Imagine all the CNN and MSNBC videos that would have to be banned. They might have no content left from the years 2016 to the present day, because I've still never heard anybody on either one of those channels concede that Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in a free and fair election that was duly certified by all 50 states and the House of Representatives in the manner prescribed by law. But you know how it is, you know how that works, you know how these people operate, and you know why they operate that way. They hardly even pretend anymore. When our guy wins, it's the most secure election in history. You are a domestic terrorist who hates democracy if you ask any questions about it, and we will not hesitate to chuck your bitch ass off the internet if you do. But if your guy wins, well, we can say any goddamn thing we want. We can spend 5 years steadfastly refusing to acknowledge the legitimacy of that result, undermining faith in our elections, to use the fashionable emotive parlance of the day. Because we own all the institutions and all the media platforms, and you don't. So suck it. Okay, that's it for my little YouTube rant. Hit the music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where Susan Wojcicki has never been voted fairest of them all, but in last year's Derby, she had the best ever finish by a filly. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I think it was last fall when I declared Wokesterism dead, or at least mortally wounded in any event, and there was nothing left for it to do but to circle the drain. And a thing happened yesterday that gave me no inclination to reassess that prognostication. What was it? Well, 3 super woke San Francisco school board members got recalled from office in the wokest city in America, and the no vote was over 70% for all 3 of them. In other words, even the Wokesters hate Wokesterism now, and this is something you'll hear fairly often now from people on the left. In their more candid moments, when there is no fear of another leftist overhearing and reporting them to the Ministry of Political Hygiene, they'll say, yeah, this is madness. I know it's madness. Nearly all my leftist friends know it's madness. Nobody is really in favor of this stuff. But you have to keep going through the woke motions, reciting the woke liturgy, keeping all the woke feast days, because if you don't, if you slip up one little bit, if you forget to post the black square for your profile image on the appointed day, if you forget to perform some required act of homage to the woke gods, or to say alms for St. George Floyd, peace be upon him, or St. Anthony Fauci, may his grace shine upon you, may you dwell in his kingdom at the end of days. If you do anything that can even be perceived as transgressing against the dogmas and the orthodoxies of the holy and apostolic church of wokery, then the Twitter rage mob will come in the middle of the night with their torches and their pitchforks, and it'll be time for your digital lynching. And speaking of lynching, let's talk about that provocative episode title, shall we? I figured I had to come up with something fairly obnoxious for the first one after getting the banhammer. And obnoxious though it may be, I also mean every word of it because it is damn well true. Wokesterism is a fringe philosophy with extremely few true believers that purports itself to be mainstream thinking. It maintains this illusion in 2 ways. 1, by capturing institutions, and 2, by violence and intimidation. This is just the first way in which Wokesterism is morally indistinguishable from the Ku Klux Klan of old. But don't worry, because I've got lots more. I came here tonight to do 2 things. Crush Wokesterism and chew bubblegum. And I'm all the fuck out of bubblegum. The KKK, similarly, was representative of a fringe philosophy. Because most Americans are decent people who do not have hate in their hearts. It's true today, and it was true 150 years ago, even among Southern whites. If the KKK had been representative of mainstream public opinion, would they have been riding around at night with masks to conceal their identities? Which brings us neatly along to our next uncanny similarity between the cultural terrorist tyrants of today and those of yesteryear. And that is the judicious and strategic usage of anonymity through mask wearing. Now, this is something not a lot of people know, but in over 1/3 of these here United States, and in the District of Columbia, it's against the law for groups of people to congregate in public with masks on. Why? Because about 100 years ago, in the early 1920s, emboldened in the aftermath of the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, probably the most racist president who ever lived, including the slaveholders, the man who thought Birth of a Nation was a documentary and said so in public, the man who resegregated the U.S. military after McKinley and Roosevelt and Taft had desegregated it. That was when the Klan had its last big resurgence. That's when it grew to the biggest numbers it would ever attain. And you know what stopped it? Anti-masking laws stopped it. All right, fine, it's a free country, First Amendment and all that, so you go do your little Klan march, but you can't conceal your identity anymore. And suddenly, wouldn't you know it, Klan membership began cratering, because there is a big damn difference between being an anonymous guy in a ridiculous pointy hat and being a guy in a ridiculous pointy hat whose name everybody knows. And the latter wound up being drastically less popular than the former. Who would have guessed? Now, there is nothing in any of those state laws, to my knowledge, that creates any sort of emergency public health carve-out for these public anti-masking laws. But as with so many other things these past couple years, our elected officials simply ignore laws they don't like or which are inconvenient to their political exigencies of the moment. So here's a question, and one which I think is in no way unreasonable in light of our recent national experience. Had the rule of law prevailed, had these public anti-masking laws been enforced as they should have, would we have seen anything like the mass orgies of violent criminality that we've witnessed both in the summer of 2020 and pretty much ever since? In other words, when public mask wearing becomes a normative activity, when people have the reasonable expectation that their identity can remain concealed even if they're on 20 different security cameras, wouldn't it stand to reason that violent criminals would thus be emboldened? Would 50 people go into a Gucci store at the same time and start busting up the display cases with claw hammers, acting like they don't have a care in the world, if they weren't required to be wearing masks that make it difficult or impossible to ascertain their identity? Wisconsin is one of the states that has a public anti-masking law. And would Waukesha have been burned and looted if that law were being enforced? Would the Portland police have declared a riot 86 nights in a row had they been able to enforce a law saying people can't congregate in public with masks on? Because people shouldn't be allowed to congregate in public with masks on, even if there was a demonstrable public health benefit in doing so. Wearing masks in public simply is not and ought not to be normative behavior, unless it's Halloween and you're a little kid. The wearing of masks in public is a thing that has deleterious societal costs, one of which is that anonymity encourages and facilitates all manner of criminality. But these costs have never been considered, even contemplated momentarily by the authors of the draconian masking policies we've had in place for 700 days now. Yes, it has been exactly 700 days. I did the arithmetic and everything. The people who authored those policies, they call themselves scientists. They claim falsely to be taking a data-driven approach on matters of public health. Hell, sometimes they even dress up in lab coats. If that won't convince you bastards, then what the hell will? But these people are stuck in the same sort of intellectual feedback loop as are people who get all of their information about the world from their preferred social media platforms. They are hidebound by single-factor analysis. So hidebound, in fact, that sometimes one can't help wondering if they even understand the concept of single-factor analysis. But it isn't just in our country, where dull, unexceptional, power-mad, self-styled tyrants use the same tactics formerly used by the KKK, insofar as employing fear and intimidation to cudgel an evil fringe worldview into the mainstream and impose it on the populace. For the Prime Minister of Canada, the man who totally is not the bastard love child of Fidel Castro, has now effectively decreed that Canadian citizens who are fed up with his idiotic policies, well, they are legally indistinguishable from the 9/11 hijackers. Justin Trudeau, whom you totally shouldn't call Fidelito because it's not funny, announced yesterday his intention to invoke Canada's Emergency Act, under the terms of which, potentially, all of Canada's ostensibly democratic institutions, as well as the civil liberties of Canadians themselves, can be swept away. And our man Justin is the guy holding the broom. It's a really shocking sort of law. When you read it, or at least when I read it, I find myself thinking, this is not the sort of law I would expect to exist in a place like Canada, because it's not overstating things, I don't think, to say this thing reads like the Enabling Act. By invoking this act and choosing to abuse its provisions, as he most assuredly will, the Prime Minister becomes a tin-pot dictator unto himself. And for perspective, think about the sorts of powers that U.S. presidents have wielded, but only during the Civil War and the two World Wars. Things like suspending habeas corpus, indefinite detention without charge, restriction of press freedom, forced mass relocations of ethnic minorities. I'm looking at you, FDR. And so on and so forth. Think about that, and then consider that in Canada, the Emergencies Act gives Justin the greasy douchebag metrosexual all of those powers and vastly more powers yet. This law has existed for, I believe, a little more than 40 years. It has never been invoked, except one time by Justin Trudeau's father, allegedly, Pierre Trudeau, in response to the kidnapping and murder of the vice premier of Quebec by francophone separatist terrorists, which I think happened in 1981, somewhere around there. And in that case, I think, sure, I can see the rationale for invoking an anti-terrorism law, because kidnapping and killing a government official to advance one's political aims is about as clear-cut a case of terrorism as you can get. But this? You're invoking an anti-terrorism law? You're invoking the most severe set of remedies it is within your power to invoke? And where is the terrorist threat you're invoking it for? And don't tell me it's because some truck drivers don't want to get a stupid vaccine, because how is anybody supposed to ever take you seriously again after you cross that Rubicon? Now, we've talked before, from time to time, about the way people act when power is their religion, and by extension, how people who venerate the idea of power are nearly always cowards and moral weaklings, the sorts of people who enjoy terrorizing and intimidating others so long as they're in a big group and they get to conceal their identity. And by further extension, tying back into the overarching theme of the episode, how power-mad people, weaklings, and cowards don't have any particular inclination to serve their constituents or to help anybody or to leave the world a better place than they found it. There are only two things that such people ever really want. Number one, more power. Number two, to crush their enemies. To a guy like Justin Trudeau, the thought would never cross his weak, cowardly little mind that these truckers might be legitimately aggrieved, or that his government's policies might be bad policies. Self-styled dictators, who also suffer from crippling pathological insecurity, they don't view themselves in such terms. Guys like Justin Trudeau don't view themselves as elected officials or even as leaders per se. They view themselves as rulers, and their citizens as the ruled. And our current crop of politicians is no different. Does anybody really think it was an accident when Stacey Abrams, gleefully happy and mask-free, took a photo with a classroom full of students with their face diapers on? Or when Nancy Pelosi has herself and her friends photographed maskless at a Napa Valley fundraising soiree where the rich white attendees are all barefaced and the black and Latino servants are all dutifully wearing their obedience muzzles? No, none of that is an accident. That is the ruling class rubbing your face in it because they can. Oh, what's that you say? You want your kids to be able to go to school without religious face coverings? Well, better not say anything bad about the Democrat Party. Better not show up complaining at any school board meetings, because you do not own your kid. We own your kid, and we strap that obedience muzzle across her face so that you damn well never forget who owns your kid. Honestly, I'm surprised we haven't heard any proposals for requiring unvaccinated people to get a special tattoo, because it would be the logical next step. But having said all that, the edifice of institutionalized Wokesterism is in the process of being toppled. I believe it as firmly as I am sitting here before you. On the left, they really enjoy using the word unsustainable. Well, this shit is unsustainable. Institutionalized Wokesterism is a fragile, delicate house of cards being held together by intimidation and fear and spite and hubris. But the breeze is picking up, and it's not going to be long before it's a stiff wind. In Canada, I increasingly get the feeling, especially after the invocation of this anti-terrorism law over people whose worst crimes are barbecuing and playing street hockey, and especially in light of this Prime Minister's acute moral cowardice, that matters are going to come to a head with some sort of Tiananmen Square incident where Trudeau is going to have to decide whether he wants to open fire on Canadian citizens who've done nothing wrong but to dislike his stupid policies and to want their lives and their freedom and their liberties back. And I have no expectation that when that moment arrives, this sleazy ignoramus will make the wrong call. And people will wind up dead over nothing but one man's desire to nurture his elephantine ego. As ever, I would love nothing more than to be wrong, but I don't suspect I am. Today's woke tyrants, from Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden right on down to every member of the race hustler industrial complex and the public health industrial complex and the transgender industrial complex and the various other industrial complexes, they are the rightful heirs of yesterday's Ku Klux Klan. imposing their will by force, brooking no critique or criticism, crushing into the dirt anyone they perceive as a threat to their ill-gotten empire. And, well, there you go, Susie. Let's see you ban this one. And who gives a damn anyway, because it'll still be on Rumble, so go watch it there. Thank you very much for joining us. I will see you tentatively on Friday, depending on how well I've kicked up the hornet's nest. So until next we meet, have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.